All right, welcome into another episode of the Patriots Training Campcast. I'm Mike Dussault, joined by Paul Perillo and Evan Lazar. And guys, we just finished practice number 10. It was a tough one. There was a lot of running today.
For the writers?
It wasn't too tough for us. We were properly hydrated. We had our binoculars. We were taking our notes. But for the players, a lot of short downs, short yardage, ground and pound. We even saw some tackling today,
Paul.
Live
tackling.
When was the last time you saw live tackling?
It's got to be 20 years, Mike. In all seriousness, Belichick used to do some live goal line stuff, and even that we haven't seen a lot of recently. Yeah. They would tackle to the ground in live goal line, but today, in the middle of the field, there were, I don't know, maybe couple dozen plays, 2 full periods. Yeah. Ones, twos, threes, tackling live to the ground, and it was hot again. The humidity is just unrelenting, and it's great weather, I think, if you're a football coach, to sort of try to prepare your team. But, the players went through a lot today, I would say.
Looked hot, looked hard. What did you think, Evan?
Yeah, this was not a football practice for people that want to see a lot of passes down the field or 7-on-7 or, the passing camps, as we call them. This was old school smash mouth, short yardage football that I thought was largely controlled by the defense today. It wasn't a whole lot of space in the run game and in some of the passing as well. A lot of pressure, I felt like, on the quarterback today too. And then you have the live tackling in there, so that gave the defense another sort of advantage that they haven't had in the past. So after 2 practices last week where we felt like the offense is making some strides, the defense punched back a little bit today.
Yeah, especially today, you might kind of expect it just in this kind of situation. But, I thought last week we did see some space in the run game. And there, it did feel like there was some progress. I totally agree, Paul. I know you were down below watching, but not a lot to write home about with the offense today. Defense was very active. I picked up an interception as well. Kyle Douglas. Who was it? I'm fully blanking on my notes.
Ja'Whaun Bentley.
Ja'Whaun Bentley
had one
on the goal line because they did some live goal line too at the beginning of that really ramped up physical period. I thought Bentley was all over the place. He had a deflection, a pick, a good tackle in open field too. So I did. There were a lot of piles. I thought they were just creating a lot of piles, and that's good. That's good two-gapping up front where you're not necessarily getting a lot of penetration in the running game, but there are just no lanes for the running backs to go, just getting piled up and immediately getting stopped.
Yeah.
The running back, as he hits the line of scrimmage, he's got to stop his legs because there's just no way to go. So depending on your perspective, it was a really good practice for the defense. Offensively, probably still a work in progress.
Yeah, Mike Purcell, big guy, right in the mix in there with Devon Godchon. You can see why. Just a huge guy that can kind of control things. Otherwise, though, and we don't want to get into too many details, but I felt like we saw some twists today. Different guys playing at fullback. We saw a little bit of trickeration with some plays and stuff. So, maybe layering some of that stuff in, but to me, the big takeaway was what we said first, though. It was this was a hard practice. This feels like one of those practices where you're trying to kind of not punish your team, but really just put them to a really hard, long practice that kind of brings out the character of a team.
Yes, I feel like it's really interesting how Gerard Mayo has done this because as a former player, you always hear players coach, and I know he's done some interviews where he's pushed back a little bit on being called a players coach. These practices, to me, do not feel like he's taking it easy on the players at all. These are long practices in the middle of the day, in the middle of the heat, physical, full pads. So I have been it's interesting. I don't know what to make of it yet, but it's interesting that they've decided to go pretty hard the last couple of days, and you do wonder with the starters or the ones, if you want to call them that, how much action those guys are going to get on Thursday night if they're going to have 2 back-to-back days in pads and go at it a little bit.
Just listening to a couple of the guys out, Jelani Tavai talked about, you got to get your head and your shoulders ready for the physicality to tackle to the ground, and that's the first thing I thought of as well. This is how he's getting that because he's probably not going to get it on Thursday. It was the first thing I thought of is what Evan just said, and which makes sense. That's what coaches do a lot. Sometimes you'll see a joint practice, and the ones, quote unquote, will get the majority of the work because they're not going to play in the game. I think we saw a little of that today.
So just some housekeeping things as well. A little bit of good news. Tyquan Thornton missed a practice last week, was back on the field, had a pretty nice catch, I thought, on 7-on-7s in the red zone against Christian Gonzalez. Nice touchdown grab for him. Jaheim Bell, who we haven't seen in a while, also back out there. But also seemed like Jabril Peppers kind of rounding back into full participation, even though he really only missed 1 practice. Marcus Jones, though, not back. A little bit of a disappointment, Paul. I know you talked about that on our last
I kind of hope
show.
to see him. And just with Thornton, first, the touchdown was actually full team. It was 11-on-11 red zone. but he spent some time after that and the rest of practice down in the lower rehab field. So he's clearly working back from something, but a good sign to see him right back out there, only missing 1 day. A couple guys returned today, Ja'Whaun Bell and Calvin Anderson, but still, kind of searching for that mix up front. That still stands out to me. Vidarian Lowe and Calvin Anderson were your left and right tackles today, and I think if we open the season like that, I don't think fans would be overly excited about that.
Corafor continues to watch.
Right.
Yeah, Corafor continues to watch, and Caden Wallace, to me, is going through some rookie growing pains right now, is a nice way to put it. He's had some struggles, I felt like, especially in the one-on-ones. You can see some of the technique issues that he's still working through are coming up in those situations when he goes up against some veteran guys. They kind of know what to counter with, based off of what he's doing. So maybe we were a little bit premature with getting excited about Caden Wallace at the beginning of last week. He was at left tackle with the ones, and it felt like he was making some progress. The last couple padded practices maybe coming back down to earth a little bit for him, and we'll see what happens. But I still feel like him and Chooks being the starters at tackle week 1 makes me feel a lot better, because at least there's some upside and some unknown there.
I agree.
Whereas with Vidarian Lowe and Calvin Anderson, you kind of know what they are at this point in their NFL career. But it's similar to the quarterback. Like with Caden Wallace, do you just throw him out there, trial by fire, and hope that he swims instead of sinks in the deep end, or do you ease it in like you probably are gonna do at quarterback? It's an interesting conversation, but without full padded practices for the most part in season, it does feel like with offensive linemen, it's almost better to play them to get them those live game reps so that they can develop that way, because otherwise they're going to be doing a whole lot of watching during the regular season.
Yeah. Anything else we missed from today's practice? It was a long one. Not a lot to write home about. Not a lot of big plays.
Yeah, I
down
would
the
just
field.
say, for the quarterbacks, I know we're just focusing on quarterbacks. Today wasn't the day.
Yeah.
They the few throws they made were mostly short. Drake May did take a couple of deep shots. Neither one of them was really there. They were both slightly overthrown, but for the most part, it was a lot of getting the ball out quickly, because Evan said it early in the podcast, there was a lot of pressure on the passer today.
All right, so 10 practices down. We'll be back outside tomorrow for the 11th practice as we get ready for the Panthers coming in Thursday night. So not really sure. We are expecting, might be back in pads again tomorrow. So maybe it'll be another tough one, maybe a little bit more throwing at the ball, but we'll have you covered here on Patriots.com. So be sure to check back in tomorrow afternoon for a full Patriots training camp cast recap.